Be extremely organized from everything, starting with your logbook. Make sure your logbook has all the proper endorsements. Here's one key trick that can catch up with you if you're not on top of it. Let's just say, for example, you got cleared to solo. You more than likely received a solo endorsement in your logbook from your instructor, where that endorsement expires at a certain time. And if you did not get that renewed in turn to be able to continue on with solos, then it could be a situation where maybe some of your solos won't be counting towards you getting your license. That can be very critical, and you don't want to find this out at the end. Stay on top of your logbook, logging all your hours in the appropriate categories, calculating everything up, and make sure you stay on top of any sort of endorsements that you may receive throughout the process. This is one of the key things that you want to be on top of that's going to help you during your check ride. And being organized not only starts with the logbook, but it goes and extends from every other piece of information. Your foreaim, having it properly tabbed out where you know where everything is, your notes that you've been taking, your handwritten notes, they're all organized where you can easily refer to them and find things. You're getting into a open book kind of environment for your check ride, particularly for that oral portion. But the book becomes useless. It becomes a heavy paperweight if you don't know where to find anything. So you want to make it a point to where you know where to find everything in that logbook, because you have, and in your foreaim and on your notes, because you have everything appropriately tabbed out, highlighted, and you've been reviewing that information. This is critical and it's step numero uno when it comes to some of the best check ride tips of all time. Organization starts in the very beginning with your logbook, and it extends over to things like having your written test results ready to go and ready for review. Remember that anything that you missed on that written examination more than likely is going to be asked of you inside of the oral exam of your check ride. So you can review those questions that you missed very thoroughly and be organized and be prepared to answer those questions. Be organized with a taxi diagram, so that way you feel like you're prepared and you know exactly where the taxi, maybe you've always exited out of the parking situation for the flight and always went to a certain direction, maybe north of the airport to take off. But on this particular day, for any particular reason, conditions, whatever, you have to exit to maybe the south to do something a little bit different. You don't want to be surprised by all of those things and not have a taxi diagram ready for you to review so you can get to where you need to get to. That should be a standard practice for you. So have these kinds of things ready to go. Your sectional charts, again, everything that you need ready to go. Your iPad, if you're using that in flight, making sure everything is fully charged with all your information loaded on it for easy reference. You can use all of these reference materials, but you want to make sure that you're walking into that check ride having everything organized from step one. Step numero dos. Familiarize yourself with the Airman Certification Standards. The ACS is pretty much going to be the outline of how the check ride is going to go. It's basically giving you the answer key to what's going to be asked of you in each of these sections. What can you prepare for? So utilize this information. All you want to do is Google this information, download it, and then review it and use that as your study guide. You're studying the exact things as they're going to go through it in the exact order. So that way you're familiarizing yourself with the flow of the process and how things are going to go. This is a great way so you don't get blindsided by anything. It's almost as if the professor at your school or the teacher at your school has given you the answer key to the test, but they need you to review it and digest the information and be able to execute the information. That's basically what you're being given with the ACS. So you don't want to walk in and not be familiar with this document. It's kind of an aid, something that's going to help you throughout the process. So you can download that immediately as you even just training before you even get close to the check ride. That way you're always studying in this fashion and studying in this format using this outline. So the day of the check ride, it's not a blindsided kind of thing, and you're already very familiar with the flow and the outline of the process itself. Tip number 3, be very concise with your answers. Be direct and to the point. Think about it just like you operate on radio comms. When you're on comms as a pilot, you want to be as concise as possible. When you're inside of your check ride, follow that same philosophy. You want to be concise and direct with your answers. If you can answer something in 4 words, then don't use 8 words. Use the 4 words to answer the question very directly. Don't not try to show your examiner how smart you are by going on these elaborate type of answers about every little thing. Remember, your examiner is way smarter than many of us, which is why they are the examiner. So you're not going to outsmart them or impress them by showing them your expressive knowledge. You're only setting yourself up to possibly dig yourself into a hole that you cannot get out of by simply just taking the simple approach that you take the radio comms, being direct, concise, and to the point. You can avoid all of this. And if you know that you're the type of person that you get very nervous, and when you get nervous, you have very talkative kind of energy, you want to practice this, not being that way. You want to practice being concise. So go through practice scenarios where you have to answer questions directly and concisely, so you don't allow your nervous energy to get the best of you and have yourself just yammering on about a bunch of nothing. This is something that needs to be practiced for some people. Some people can get it because that's maybe the way their personality, they're hardwired and they're very concise and direct in the beginning, and other people have to practice to be that way. Know what kind of person you are. Have a strong sense of self-awareness. If you need to practice this, then make it a point to do so way before your check ride. Tip number 4, remember, you are pilot in command, and your check ride is just an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you are pilot in command. What I mean by that is, don't default to your examiner for things that you want to be responsible for. You want to show that you are the responsible and accountable pilot in command. So make the calls and do the things that you need to do in the aircraft to keep yourself safe. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Don't defer to your examiner about things. Remember, this isn't a flight lesson. This is an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you have the tools to be pilot in command. So obviously, don't let them distract you. Treat them like they are a passenger. If you feel that they're becoming incredibly talkative and you're trying to execute a maneuver, feel free to just put your hand up and say, give me a moment, let me demonstrate this maneuver, and then I can answer it, or then I can get right to you. They will take pride in the fact that you're taking control of the situation. This is what being pilot in command is all about. So make sure you demonstrate that. Treat them like a passenger. Make sure they're feeling safe in the aircraft. Safety is really big. It's a very big key to just being a great pilot in general. So never forget that and always be able to demonstrate that. Remember, it's not a flight lesson. It's your opportunity to demonstrate that you have the tools to be pilot in command. Number 5, be able to demonstrate that the aircraft that you're getting ready to take your check ride in is airworthy. So you want to go through all of your checklists and make sure that that aircraft is airworthy. This is very key for multiple reasons, but think about it from this viewpoint. Once you pass this check ride, and you will pass because you're going to watch all the videos on this channel and you're going to be very well prepared for everything. But when you pass, you're going to be given the opportunity and the license and certificate to be able to go out and fly aircraft from various locations, various people, your buddies, aircraft, and all these kinds of things. So it's very critical that you understand how to tell if an aircraft is airworthy or not. So just think about that. If you're going to be flying these different aircraft in different states and from friends and friends of friends and all this kind of stuff, wouldn't that be a great asset for you to know, to be able to look at documentation and to be able to examine the aircraft and determine to yourself, is this aircraft airworthy? So this is something you want to be able to demonstrate on your check ride, and make sure that you know how to demonstrate this, particularly if you're flying an aircraft that may have other supplemental kind of things on top of the standard airworthiness checklist that you want to go through. Go through all these things and make sure that you can determine with confidence and with great certainty that that aircraft is airworthy. Tip number 6, talk through all maneuvers while you're performing them. This is a great way to let your examiner know exactly what you're thinking while you're executing the maneuver. So you're leaving nothing to chance. And it's also a great tool and a great way for you, because we have a tendency, particularly as human beings, when we say things out loud, we have a tendency to perform and execute them at another level than we would if we were not doing that. It's a great way to not only retain things to memory, but also that muscle memory of hearing yourself in audibly saying and actually saying something out loud while executing it. It's a great scientific tool that helps you along the way. And again, it lets your examiner know exactly what you are thinking. So as you're swinging and banging that thing and doing your maneuvers, steep turns, power on, power off stalls, talk it through exactly what you're doing. this is a great tool that can help you on your check riding. You don't have to wait until the check ride to start doing this. You can start doing this with your flight instructor when you go over flights. Make it a point to talk things through. It can help you learn, and it can help you on the day of your check ride. Tip number 7, when you're studying for the check ride, make sure that you're making it a point to understand the information, not just memorize it. You don't want to just memorize something so you can get through something, because that's going to trip you up, particularly on the oral portion of your check ride. You want to make sure you thoroughly understand it, and you can understand the why. Why are things a certain way when flying the aircraft? Why does the aircraft do this? Why are conditions conducive more to this than that? You want to understand all the whys of flight, all the whys of aviation, not just you memorized a bunch of text inside of the fore-aim or inside of any particular article or video that you may have read or listened to. This is critical. Don't just be a memorization kind of person that can just regurgitate a bunch of stuff back. Understand the why. This is going to help you not only pass your check ride, this is going to help you be a better pilot in general, particularly if you go on to do pretty much anything in aviation. Just understanding the why, because all these layers kind of work in conjunction with each other, and it's like one big daisy chain. So if you understand the why in one component, it can help you and understand many other components in your future in aviation. Understand the why. Don't just memorize. Tip number 8, you want to over prepare. You want to know more information than you probably think that you need to know. And it's good reason for this, because you don't know which rabbit hole your examiner is going to go down. So you want to over prepare for everything. And think about anyone that has become successful at pretty much anything in life, or just think about your own life and various other areas of life that you've become successful in. Did anyone ever look back on their life and say, I'm glad I didn't over prepare? Over preparing is a great thing. No one ever regrets over preparing. That's something that when you're prepared for something, it gives you a great deal of confidence in knowing more than even what you may be asked or what you may need to know. It can pay dividends in the end. It's also going to help you in the previous tip, which is understanding the why. Always over prepare. Preparation meets opportunity. This is what leads to success, and it's going to help you on your check ride. Know more than what you think you need to know. Over prepare. Tip number 9, know as much about the aircraft that you're having your check ride in as possible. This can be very tricky for some people depending on how your training went. You may have a scenario where you did a lot of your training, particularly let's just say 90% of your training inside of one aircraft. So you're very familiar with that aircraft. But then you may have other people who may have switched back and forth between different aircrafts. Maybe half of their time was in a Cherokee, the other half was in a Cessna, etc., etc. So if you're doing these sorts of things, there's nothing wrong with that, getting a feel for different aircrafts. But the aircraft that you're going to have your actual exam and check ride in, you want to make sure you thoroughly understand everything about that aircraft. You don't want to get to the point where you're kind of a little foggy, only vaguely familiar with the avionics and the GPS system in this aircraft, but maybe the other aircraft that you flew throughout training, you were very familiar with it. You want to be familiar with the avionics and the fuel capacity and all that for the aircraft that you're going to be flying for your check ride. So if you've been splitting time a little bit here, a little bit there, or maybe you've gotten to a certain point where you're not very familiar with some of the avionics or some of the GPS or the VR components or whatever you may need, you want to make sure you take some time to really get familiar with those for the aircraft that you're going to have your check ride in. Number 10 is a critical one, and it's something that you can start doing on day 1 of your pilot training. Write down all of your bad habits and review them as you're going throughout the process. And then that way, when it's time for you to take your check ride, you review that bad habit list and you do everything that you can to correct those as you're going through the process, and you make sure that those are on top of your mind on the day of the check ride. You don't want any bad habit that you may have developed. Maybe you have a bad habit in pre-flight. Maybe you always miss to check something. Or maybe it's something that you always do on takeoff, on landing, on one of your maneuvers. You're writing these things down. You're visualizing them and you're repeating them back to yourself so they're on top of your mind so you don't make those kinds of mistakes in your check ride. You need to identify before you can correct. And one great way to identify them is from day one of your training, or start now while you're in the middle of your training. Write down any bad habits and review them, and make it a point to try to correct them long before the day of your check ride. Number 11, if you remember nothing else, remember this one. Number 11, focus on safety and not just perfectly executing certain maneuvers. Being a great pilot, and particularly being able to pass your check ride, it's a lot to do with demonstrating that you are a safe pilot. Remember, your examiner is getting ready to sign you off for you actually going out and getting your certificate and your license. They don't want anything coming back to them, say a month later, 2 months later, etc., that maybe you were involved in something that was very unsafe, because then they're going to get a lot of questions about what went down in the examination itself. So with that being said, hey, you being able to execute a perfect power off stall or a perfect steep turn, beautiful. But you being able to execute that you have perfect safety kind of measures that you take as a pilot, that's even better. Focus on safety, because you're going to be practicing safety on every flight. You're not going to be going up in the air after you get your license and just randomly practicing power on, power off stalls. That's not something that you're going to be naturally just doing all the time. But safety, you're going to do that on every flight, everywhere you go. By yourself, safety. With your family, safety. With your friends, safety. Studying for another rating, safety. So it matters to be able to demonstrate that in a major kind of way, not just being fancy with the maneuvers that you have to execute. Like, oh, I nailed a short field landing. That's great, but were you safe in doing it? All the things that you do, make sure that you're always going above and beyond when it comes to showing that you're a safe pilot. Tip number 12, learn to handle mistakes well. Just because you made one little mistake on your check ride doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to fail your check ride. But how you handle mistakes is very, very key. So if you know you're the type of person that if you make a mistake, you have a tendency to get down on yourself, and then it starts a snowball effect of you feeling down and depressed, and maybe you just repeating mistakes over and over again, you want to get that in check throughout your training. You don't want to be that kind of person, because mistakes is something that happen pretty much each and every day. Each and every day at every airport in the world, somebody somewhere is making a mistake, because we're all human. But it's how you handle those mistakes. That's important. And that's what your examiner is going to be looking for. How do you handle mistakes? So it's not about being perfect, but how do you handle mistakes? You want to try your best to keep those mistakes to a minimum. And then also too, if you were to make one, how do you handle it? That's where you got to man up or woman up in this thing. Hey, lucky number 13, be confident. This should go without saying, but it's very critical, and particularly when you're in the learning phase, it's something that can get overlooked. You want to make sure that you're always confident as a pilot. Every time you get in the cockpit and behind the controls, you want to be confident. And reason being is because confident has a large thing to do and a largely responsible for your safety. If you believe that in your abilities that you can do something, the likelihood of you actually achieving it is very, very high. But even if you're the most talented person, but you don't believe in yourself, you're limiting how far you can go. Confidence is very important. And it's natural to maybe in the beginning, hey, while you're learning in the very beginning stages, you don't have confidence, but you want to make sure that you continue to build that confidence little by little as you're progressing along the way throughout your training. So that way, when you get to that check ride, you're demonstrating confidence, and your confidence isn't inflated on top of anything. It's built on all the foundation that you've been laying along the way. You don't want to have fake confidence. You want to have confidence that's built on your abilities of all the things that you've been through throughout your pilot training. Use your training as an opportunity to help build your confidence. But when you get to that check ride, you want to show that you are a confident pilot, because a confident pilot can be one that can get back on the ground safely. Tip number 14, don't rush your answers. Think before you speak and act. This is something that you should be doing when you're piloting command anyway. Just because something has occurred, you don't want to be immediate to react to it so post hastily. You want to be able to think before you act. Think before you speak on comms. Follow that same strategy and that same practicality when you're inside of the check ride. Do the same things. Questions are coming at you left and right. You don't have to be so anxious to answer so quickly. Think before you speak. Think about what you're saying. Be concise as possible, but make sure that you're not rushing through everything. Because when you rush, you can possibly forget everything. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to get into that brain lock kind of phase. You want to be able to think before you act and before you speak. Because follow that same kind of philosophy if you're in the sky. If you're in the sky and something was to happen to your engine, if all of a sudden you used to see a small fire, you can handle that, but you want to think before you act. Think about what are those emergency procedures? What are you going to do? And then go for it. Versus you're just reacting and immediately you're trying to just pulling knobs and controls and everything trying to get it down. That's not good. So you want to demonstrate that mindset on the ground, that you're very calm and you're going to think it through before acting and before speaking. Number 15, make sure that you always do clearing turns. Before getting into your maneuvers, do your clearing turns. Let's just say you out with your examiner and you out into the practice area, you're in the middle of your exam, the very beginning, and then they just ask you to show them a maneuver. Before you do that maneuver, again, it's not a flight lesson. You're demonstrating that you're piloting command. Before you do the maneuver, you say, okay, wait 1 second, let me do clearing turns first. You're piloting command. Make the call. This is what I mean by it's about demonstrating that you are piloting command, not just you deferring to them for everything. Before you get into maneuvers, always doing your clearing turns to make sure you're being, again, safe. You see how all these are tying into each other? Safety first, heavy emphasis on safety, showing that you're piloting command, keeping everyone safe at all times, making the call. These are the communicating, letting them know what you're thinking out loud. These are all the things that you want to be doing throughout your check ride. Sweet 16, know all of your emergency procedures inside and out. For every type of emergency in the aircraft that you're flying, know all the emergency procedures and try to memorize them and know them by heart and just verify them with the checklist. But you want to know this because this ties into being a safe pilot. This is one of the things that you want to make sure that you thoroughly understand. If any kind of emergency pop off, you will know how to handle it. So you got to demonstrate that. And one of the first things is you're very familiar with what your emergency procedure would be given any kind of emergency that may occur. This is valuable information for you to know for the entire life span that you plan on being a pilot. So this is good information that you're learning, but make it a point to drill it into your head. And again, you know what the procedures are. You just confirm with the checklist. That's how well you know it. And if you know it at that level, you're in a great place for your check ride. Know and be familiar, very familiar with all emergency procedures inside and out. Number 17, it kind of ties into being high level of self-awareness and a high level of social awareness. Once you're assigned a designated pilot examiner and you know who that person is going to be, well before your check ride, you want to make sure you do a little research about this examiner. Everybody is different and we're all human. We have certain topics that we may favor more than the other. Maybe your examiner really favors weather. They like to really drill down on weather. Maybe they really favor airspace. So you want to be aware of these kinds of things. And obviously you can ask around. This examiner in your area probably has dealt with other students that maybe some of your friends have went through, or other pilots. Maybe even your instructor has had the same examiner in the past. So you want to be well versed in these kind of areas. Your job is to know all of the information. But if you know someone favors something a little bit more than something else, then you want to be aware of that as well. So you want to make sure you spend extra time on that, especially if you know for a fact that that's one of your weaknesses. Let's just say they favor airspace, but then you know airspace is one of your weaknesses. Then you want to spend the extra time on airspace for multiple reasons. One, it's your weakness, and then two, you thoroughly know that they are going to drill down on that because they favor that subject matter. That's number one about having that sense of social awareness. We're all social creatures. We all have certain topics and things that we favor and lean more one way than the other way. But then you also want to have a sense of your setting, and in terms of the awareness there as well. We all fly in different environments around the country. Understands how certain things in certain areas are going to matter most. Let's just say you live in an area where the weather is just all over the place. At one moment it can be beautiful and 75 degrees and sunny. Then the very next moment it's 40 degrees and cold, and everything else is just going haywire and rainy. Weather and understanding weather probably is going to be heavily, drilled down on the check ride, because they understand that in this particular area here, you really have to be on top of weather. Maybe it's an airspace situation where there's multiple layers of airspace in a short nautical mile radius. So if you're going to be flying around this area, you need to know about these airspaces and what are the qualifications and things that are going on. So use your sense of social awareness and self-awareness and understanding the setting in the area that you live in and where you fly out of, and think to yourself, based on this area, look at that sectional chart, based on all this stuff that's around, what are they probably going to ask me? Because they probably going to want to know, am I safe in this particular environment right here with all the elements that we have to deal with flying in this area? Number 18 is more of a mindset thing, and it's about understanding who your examiner is and their role. Your examiner is not there to fail you. They actually want you to pass, but obviously they want to see you demonstrate that you're ready to pass. So don't go into your check ride with any sort of defeatist attitude of feeling defeated, that the examiner is going to be so hard on you, like they don't want you to become a pilot, etc., etc. Sometimes people can feel that way, particularly maybe if you've had a hard professor or hard teachers for various subjects in the past. If you already have that negative mindset, it can only be a downward spiral from there from you, because you're already going into it with some sense of predetermined conflict. Do not do this. Opposite. You want the opposite effect. You want to go into it that this examiner wants to pass me. I just need to show them that I have the tools so they can pass me. See how that's a different mindset? This is why positivity is very much important. Nothing great has ever came from being negative. A lot in this world great has came from being positive. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to remember when walking into that check ride. Do not have a very defeated attitude before it even begins. Always think positive. Think positive about yourself, your abilities, the examiner, and your instructor. Everyone involved is rooting for you. Think this way, and it will be outward projected when you go through your check ride. Tip number 19. Obviously, you know that there's a lot of information that you got to study. So you want to have a studying system that works for you. This is where you have to experiment, and you really have to find something that works for you. Maybe it's the flashcard method. Maybe you make a bunch of flashcards and that's how you review your information, and that's how you get things down. Maybe you work with a studying buddy and you guys go back and forth and Q&A each other. Maybe that method works for you. Maybe you watch the videos on this channel because they're already designated and set up in various playlists. You want to know about instruments and system? Watch the instrument and system playlist on this channel. You want to know about airspace? Watch the airspace playlist on this channel. You want to know about weather? Watch the weather playlist on this channel. You can take it day by day, week by week, watch each one of those playlists. That's what the information is there for, and you'll be ready for your check ride. Whatever method you choose, maybe you choose a combination of all 3 or 4 of those things. Whatever works for you, that is great, but you need to find a method that works for you. We all learn differently, we all study differently, but one thing's for certain, you're gonna have to find a studying method. And once you find it, stick to it and follow it all the way through until the end, until you get, of course, and pass your check ride. Tip number 20, you wanna make sure you take the time long before your check ride to do a mock check ride. But here's the secret. With your instructor, you want to do a mock check ride in flight, and you also want to do a mock check ride in the oral portion on the ground. Make time to do this with your instructor. That way you can identify strengths and weaknesses in both the oral portion and the flight portion before your check ride, and then you can go and reconfigure everything. So have your instructor tell them to be hard on you just like the examiner would be, and get into their examiner mode, and you guys do a mock check ride, the oral portion and the flight portion, and see how it goes for you. If you do this And this is going to get you familiar with the ACS. This is going to help you follow all the way through it. This is going to help you go through all the maneuvers. This is basically going to give you that practice session like a scrimmage just before the game. But you're not going to do this the day before your check ride. You're going to do this maybe even in the middle 3/4 of the way through your actual training. That way you have time to take any recon that you get. You identify your strength and a weakness, like, oh wow, in that mock oral portion, I really was weak on this. Now you have something to go study and shoot for. In the flight portion, you wanted to make sure you nail this. Make sure you do yourself a nice little mock oral and in-flight check ride how everything's going to go on that day. This way, when you get to the day, the whole environment is already familiar with you. Tip number 21, your oral portion of your check ride will be scenario based. This is very important. And this is why when you refer to one of the earlier tips, you do not want to just memorize a bunch of facts. You want to understand the why. Because when questions are being asked to you, they're not going to just, hey, just tell me what is the minimum equipment list. Now, that's not the kind of questions you're going to be getting. You're going to be getting a scenario. Oh, you're out flying with a friend and then you show up at the airport and you realize that one of the nav lights are out. What are you going to do? They're going to give you a scenario. How do you figure it out? What are you going to reference? What are you going to check? So you want to make sure you kind of understand scenarios. And this is why it's important for you to have a mock oral check ride with your instructor to kind of go through this scenario based questioning. So again, you're not blindsided by any of this and you're already very familiar with these kinds of things. And you can explain yourself and understand the why of the different scenarios. This is great that they do this in the world of aviation because it's not just about memorizing a bunch of facts. Everything is scenario based. Every time you go to the airport, you get ready to plan a flight, it's going to be based on that current scenario, current conditions, current everything that's happening. So them quizzing you and examining you in that way is a great thing. So embrace that, but understand that that's what it is, and that you're going to have to be able to answer those questions based off that scenario sequence of events. Number 22, deuce. You want to make sure you fly it all the way to the hangar. And what I mean by this one is, let's just say you've already did the oral portion. Then you went up in flight and you were nailing your maneuvers. Everything was going good. Then you start to working on some landings. You're doing everything you're doing. And then right at the end, you're feeling good about everything because everything is going great, but you get very laxed on maybe that last or final landing. Or maybe after you've already landed on the runway, you're very laxed in flying and taxiing back to the hangar, and you maybe miss a few instructions. Make sure you fly all the way to the hangar to tie down. The check ride is not over until that aircraft is completely shut down, tied down, and you've walked away from it. Now you can begin your relaxing in. It's over. Do not get excited because maybe you did something right, you executed a certain maneuver right, or you nailed a landing, and then you just get laxed towards the end. Fly it all the way to tie down. Make sure you're doing this because we all have a tendency, particularly if you're doing very well, to kind of maybe a sign of relief. That's good that you're doing well, but fly it to the hangar. Tip number 23, dress to impress. You may be thinking to yourself, what do what you have on have to do with flying the plane? And it's really less about your abilities to fly the plane. It's all about first impressions and appearances. Think about this. When you go and meet your designated pilot examiner, that makes a short window of opportunity for them to get to know you. You're literally talking about just a few hours. That few hour window, they're going to determine whether or not you become a pilot or whether you don't. So putting everything into your favor, including first impressions. A lot of first impressions are made off of appearances. So you want to make sure that you dress to impress. And by doing this, you don't have to be elaborate with this. You don't have to go out and get a tuxedo and get your favorite suit. You don't have to do any of that. But make sure you're well put together. Make sure you don't look like you just rolled out of bed, because that presents the fact and that creates the first impression that you don't really care. You don't want to do that. You want to make it look like you're very well put together and that you do care and that you come in with kind of a professional kind of look about what you're doing. This is going to help you tremendously. Again, first impressions, not just with this check ride thing, just in life in general. We're all a human, and even though people may try to think as if they don't have these kind of things whirling in their mind when they meet someone in the beginning, they do, because we're all human. So if you know this, use this to your favor by making a strong and good first impression. And of course, we all know when you look good and you smell good, you fly good. And these are 23 of the greatest check ride tips of all time. Subscribe to this channel.